This podcast is brought to you by Give Us Mo Entertainment and by Paramount Plus.
Welcome, everybody, to this episode of the Arete Podcast. I'm joined by Paul Musson, and we're going to learn a lot about finance today, or I should say economics, not so much finance, although I'm sure finance is involved. But I guess for those who don't know who you are, tell us who Paul Musson is.
Yeah. Okay. Well, thank you, Jake. So, born in Wales. My family moved to Montreal when I was young. Grew up there, moved to Toronto in 1990, just looking for work, sleeping on a floor of a bachelor apartment, 29 years old, working in a video store at nights. But it was a long journey, but I knew I wanted to be in investment analysis. So I slowly got into that field and was very naive for various reasons.
Yeah, aren't we all when we get into a field?
Well, yeah, but I was especially so, and in part because I really wasn't that focused on finding a career for most of my 20s. I had a thirst for knowledge, and so I would just do whatever was required at university, and so I could get home and read my history and philosophy and nature. And it's like Mark Twain said, I never let school interfere with my education. But of course, education very important, so I stuck it out, and then it just sort of hit me. Anyway, so eventually became a portfolio manager at a mutual fund company, and it was the best job ever.
Really?
I absolutely loved it. Loved the work itself. And there would be some days I wouldn't talk to a soul. And
Sounds beautiful.
yeah. And I'm happy to talk to people, but I'm also happy not to. I would just close the door, open up a brand new annual report from a company I was analyzing. Okay, let's see if I can figure this out. Figure out the competitive advantage. Is it sustainable because it's got a good corporate culture? Okay, let's go through the accounting, see if they're screwing around with things. What's the balance sheet look like? What's the history of this company? Like, what do they stand for? I don't know why everybody doesn't love doing this, and thank God they don't, because it'd be too competitive, right? But anyways, great team, great business, great clients. And I felt that I was performing an important role in society, not just me, but all investors or long-term investors, even short-term, I guess. Now, and the reason I say that is the way a free market capitalist system is supposed to work is, and this is all an answer to your question, by the way. So it's
Oh no,
um,
go wherever you
yeah,
want. I do want to
okay.
interject one question real quick, because somebody listening may not know the answer to this. What is a mutual fund? Just a real
Oh,
basic idea.
yeah, sure. So mutual fund is when, so let's say you wanted to invest in stocks, but it's not so expensive anymore, but it used to be very expensive to do it on your own.
Hmm.
And plus, you don't have the time to do all the research that's required, or you can do some, and so what you would do is, a whole bunch of investors like yourself would give your money to a mutual fund, and then a mutual fund would take all of that capital, and you have a team of people doing all the research, and now you can operate in scale, and there's lots of economies of scale, when you're operating in size for a mutual fund. And so then you would get units of that mutual fund. So our funds at the peak were something like 14 or 15 billion dollars Canadian. And so you would have units of that, and they would be invested in. So if you're an individual investor, you might only invest in maybe half a dozen shares, stocks, but we would invest in anywhere from 30 to 50 different stocks. So a bit more diversification and stuff like that. So that's what a mutual fund is.
Yeah, but the difference between a mutual fund and say like, well, I mean, I guess an index fund is technically a mutual fund, but it's managed differently.
Yeah, so an index fund there's no research that goes on. The index fund just takes clients' capital, and let's say there are 100 shares or 100 different stocks in the index, and one might be a 5% weight, another might be a 3% weight, a 2%, 1%. So whatever weight those stocks are in the index, that index fund would take, let's say it got $1 billion in new money, it would buy those stocks in proportion to their weight in the index. So they're price indiscriminate. They don't care if the stock that you're buying 5% weight in is super expensive. No, it's 5% of the index, and we're just buying it. And it does cause stock markets to go up. It gets a little bit complex, but because the liquidity of some of those very large stocks do not equal their market cap weighting. And so there's an inelasticity, if you will. And so I can try go into it later if you're interested.
I just want people listening to this to have sort of at least a surface level understanding of what
Yeah,
we're talking
no.
about. The index fund was a me question.
Yeah, and it's also called passive. So
Mm-hmm.
when they say passive, it's that, well, look, we're not going to do any analysis. We don't care what the prices are. They're completely hands off. Get the money, allocate it. Money goes out, you sell it.
So you're
But
literally at that point you're literally just kind of riding the market, a certain
exactly.
percentage of the market.
Whereas people like me, we were called active investors. So we don't care what the market is made up of. We're going to look at that stock market, and we are going to focus on the highest quality businesses at the most reasonable prices. So, I mean, you'd like to get them cheap, but quality businesses are pretty hard to find cheap. They're quality for a reason, and everybody knows it, so you have to pay more for them. Anyways, so in a free market capitalist system, you're only supposed to benefit to the extent that somebody else is benefiting from your actions. So you're only supposed to benefit if you have created capital in some form, some shape, and then you exchange your capital with someone else. So if you make a bike, you created capital. I make a suit, I've created capital. We exchange that capital with each other. You got my suit, I've got your bike. And very importantly, that didn't come at anybody else's expense, right? There was no bike or suit in the economy. We both created the capital, swapped it. Nobody else is worse off. That's the way it's supposed to work. But increasingly, people are benefiting at the expense of others, which we'll get into in a second. So I felt I had a very important role to play because by being an investor in high quality companies around the world, I was taking the savings, the capital of Canadians who had created capital, consumed some, saved the rest, gave it to us. We go around the world looking for the best companies who are going to put that capital to productive use to create more capital, to improve their customer value proposition, wow their customers, their profit goes up, they hire more employees, they pay their employees more. That higher profitability pushes the share price up, and that pushes the stock market up. So it used to be that when you saw a rising stock market, that was a symptom of a lot of good things going on in the economy, of a lot of capital being put to productive use and people mutually benefiting from their actions. Now, if you got a basket case company, it's very important that that company does not get more capital because they are consuming capital, they're destroying capital. And so you want to make sure that your client's capital doesn't end up with them because it's not coming back. So it's a very important role that investors play. Now, starting around 2002, but in particular after the great financial crisis in 08, 09, central banks started short-circuiting that system, started short-circuiting the price discovery mechanism. So if stock markets started to go down because they were too expensive, well, central banks didn't like this. They would start printing more money.
Mm-hmm.
If basket case companies were suffering, they'd take interest rates down to zero. So these basket case companies could afford to take on more debt. So let's say Apple wants to borrow $10,000 from you. Now, Apple's not a basket case company, it's a very high quality business. But let's say you're looking at Apple and the next iPhone, and all kind of stuff. And, you know what? They've got some debt now. I'm not sure about their ability to pay me back. I want 10% interest over 5 years per year. But then the central bank might say, well, no, we don't think Apple can afford that, and they shouldn't have to pay 10%. So we're going to lower rates. So you're only going to get 7% instead of 10% from Apple. So the central bank is determining how much interest income you're getting, which is that this sort of stuff made me so angry because when you distort the price discovery mechanism in capital markets, which is millions of people who are deciding what sort of return they want on their investment, when you distort that, you get capital that's misallocated and you get an economy that is now less productive. You also, by the way, you get increasing wealth disparity, which we can go into. You also get much more debt, government spending, all these things are really bad for the economy. So, and then and then you start getting all these basket case companies, which are called zombies. Now, a zombie is a company that doesn't produce enough operating profit to even pay the interest expense on its debt. So that would be like, a homeowner who is not even earning enough money to pay the interest on their credit card debt. Never mind pay any of the debt back. They can't even keep up with the interest. And last report I saw, about 17% of listed companies in developed markets around the world were zombies because central banks have short-circuited the price discovery mechanism of capital markets. So I started to get very angry about all this. So I started talking about this many years ago and talking about it in an intellectually honest manner, a manner in which my clients could understand. When I first started making presentations, I used to try to impress people how smart I was, and maybe they give me their money. And it's a terrible way to be. And yeah, and a couple of things happened. I got caught up in sort of little white lies, or at least leaving things out that I knew people probably would have wanted to hear, but might not have been good for me. And so I just said, I'm not going to do that anymore. I'm just going to tell people the truth. And there's a great line about telling the truth. When you tell the truth, you never have to remember what you said. It's so liberating. You're so much more relaxed. And yeah, tell people the truth and let them decide if I'm appropriate for them and their clients, rather than me telling them that I'm appropriate. And so I started communicating in this way, using analogies that my clients could then use with their clients, empower them in their business, make their business better. And then some people started saying, Paul, you should really write a book about all this that central banks are doing and stuff. You're the only one who talks about it in this manner that we know of. And so I hadn't really planned on doing that, but then I started, yeah, why not? And so in 2019, I started writing my book, and I couldn't finish it because investing is a full-time business, full-time job. I could only write on vacations. And so my team was ready to take over, and I wanted to finish my book, and I'd started a blog, which is a similar sort of theme. It's a free blog, weekly blog that goes out. People can sign up for. And so I left my employer in 2022, 3 years ago at the end of this month. Got the book finished, got it published, and now I'm just trying to market the book through stuff like this, through my blog, get the word out there, help people understand what's going on so we can change what's happening, because the path we're on is unsustainable. We can go into exactly why that is. And if we don't change it ourselves, it will change on its own and it will not be pretty. And so that's Paul Musson.
So my first real question for you is you've already touched on a lot of things I want to talk about. But economically speaking, well, first of all, I want to clarify one thing. So are you still in Canada or in the okay, so you're in Canada, but what you're talking about, since you're investing in the American stock market, I assume pretty heavily.
Yeah, I mean, I'm not anymore. Like I'm
But
in
you
bet.
were.
I were, yeah, I
Yeah.
was. U.S. is always our largest weighting.
Yeah, yeah. So the monetary policy you're talking about goes because, well, I'm not even going to say most of our viewers, but I would wager to say that most of the people watching the podcast right now, although shout out to my Canadian listeners, I know you're out there, but you're largely talking about, I guess it's U.S. and Canadian monetary policy, but a lot of my questions are going to be framed in a U.S. monetary policy, sort of.
Yeah, so the issues are the same for the most part in America, Canada, Japan, Australia, Europe. They're all using the same playbook. They all talk to each other. They all follow each other with interest rates more or less. I mean, there are
Yeah.
some disparities today, but so it's a developed economy issue, but America leads,
Yeah.
and
Yeah.
we're the leader. So
So
yeah.
yeah. So the first question is, economically speaking, how screwed are we?
Well, it's um it's not beyond repair.
That's good news.
I mean, if it was beyond repair, there'd be no point in me doing any of this, like I'd be building a bomb shelter somewhere, storing it with food and water and stuff. Um, but there's no way out without considerable pain. Now, there's more pain for some than others. There's more pain for my generation. I'm 64, I'm a baby boomer. My generation has benefited enormously from these policies. And we've been able to benefit at the expense of younger people, at the expense of newcomers to our country, and particularly in housing, which we should talk about. So, and the out of control government spending, out of control government debt. There's this belief that you can get something for nothing. There's academics who like to put forward these economic myths, their economic laws as they would like them to be rather than as they are. They're economic laws in their mind that justify government spending, gov justify government debt. And all it does is lead to a slower and slower economy, which it gets harder and harder to fix. There's a rule of holes. First rule of holes is if you find yourself in a hole, stop digging. Well, not only have we not stopped digging, but we're digging faster and faster. And so the hole is enormous. We can still get out, but it's just going to be that much more difficult. But I believe, like I have great faith in people. I think the average person is very smart. You just got to give them a chance. But most people cannot contribute to this conversation because they don't speak the language of economics. And that's why my book is written in very simple, easy to understand terms, stories, analogies, stuff like that. If your listeners read it, they will know what's going on. And then you empower people with knowledge and truth and demand the right actions from our policymakers, who also are not bad people. They want to do the right thing. But doing the right but difficult thing today is political suicide because the population is being convinced that debts and deficits don't matter. And they'll say stuff like, well, hey, you said debts and deficits matter. Look, they're even bigger than they were 10 years ago. We still haven't blown up. No, but the situation is getting, it's like telling somebody who is, the overweight, got a bad diet, they drink and smoke too much, they never exercise, and you say, hey, this isn't good. This is going to lead to bad things. 10 years later, they haven't had a heart attack yet. So, hey, I guess you were wrong that this is bad for me. No, it's terrible. Like you're getting worse and worse. And yes, maybe you're still performing, but you would have been performing much better if you didn't have this lifestyle. So the US economy is called that which is unseen. The US economy would be performing much better today if it wasn't for all the debt and deficits. Wealth disparity would be much narrower. There would be much less division in society if all of this had not been happening. But it's the unproven counterfactual, of course, right? It's that which isn't seen. but
Yeah.
we can fix it.
Well, that's very encouraging to hear because a lot of what I hear out there is kind of doom and gloom. But so you've already touched on this. So we hear all the time. You have a much better idea of this, I'm sure. But we out in the ether hear all the time. The rich are getting richer, the poor are getting poorer, and I have a feeling you're going to say yes to this. Is that supported by the data or is it a matter of perception? Because people will point to things like, well, yeah, but consumer goods are that much better for less money. Effectively, like we all have smartphones now, we all have better and more TVs, but I can tell you from experience, yes, the rich are getting richer and the poor are getting poorer. But what's driving that? What's the reason behind that?
So, in my opinion, so yes, it is happening, has happened. And in my opinion, the reason it has happened is because, particularly starting in 2001, 2002, the US Federal Reserve started sacrificing the mainstream economy, or Main Street, on the altar of higher asset prices. And so, first, well, you had the booming stock market in the 90s, the dot-com craze. That created what's called a wealth effect. So, a wealth effect means if you see your stock portfolio going up in value, you feel wealthier. So, you might borrow money on those stocks and go out and spend it, buy a new SUV or a flat screen TV, go on a trip. Well, this is good for what's called GDP. GDP, gross domestic product, is a measure of all final spending. So if politicians see GDP growing, final spending growing, two-thirds of it is consumption, then they think, oh, the economy must be in great shape. Well, yes and no. If it's growing because people's stock portfolios are growing because companies are putting capital to productive use to increase their profitability and create more capital, then that increased spending is the result of more capital being created in the economy. That's good and sustainable. But if the increased spending is happening not because stock markets are going up because capital is being produced, but if stock markets are going up because central banks took interest rates down to zero or printed trillions of dollars to drive stock markets higher, then no more capital was being produced. So now this excess spending is not a symptom of more capital being produced, is more debt going into the economy. Now, so you had the dot-com crash, you had a negative wealth effect, and then a couple of commentators, Paul Krugman from the New York Times and Paul McCulley from PIMCO, both of them recommended that the Fed start a new wealth effect in the housing market. And the rationale it was that more people own houses than stocks. And so the wealth effect will have a bigger impact on spending. So they took interest rates down to 1%. And it was a very mild recession in '01. It was only one quarter of contraction. Normally it's two quarters. And then even after the economy started to grow, they kept interest rates down at emergency levels to drive housing prices higher, keep mortgage rates as low as possible to increase demand for housing, drive those housing prices higher. People will feel wealthier, extract equity from their home and spend it. So that's exactly what people did. And Greenspan every year would talk about how many hundreds of billions of dollars of equity were extracted, was extracted from people's homes to spend. And then, of course, they blew the whole thing up. And so rather than learn their lesson, say, well, maybe we shouldn't interfere with people's decision about whether or not they can afford to buy a home or how much home they should buy. Maybe that should be up to them. They doubled and tripled down by printing trillions of dollars, buying trillions of mortgage-backed securities to drive mortgage rates lower, drive housing prices higher. And now you have a housing affordability crisis in America for the next generation. And it's way worse, by the way, here in
I
Canada.
was I was just gonna say that's something a lot of Americans aren't privy to. And hey, I get it. I just bought a house, so
Hmm.
I get it.
Yeah.
And it's not
Uh-huh.
my first one. It's always a bit of a drag. But I do have friends in Canada where they say things like the idea of buying a home in the United, depending on where you live. I live in Indiana, which is economically not too bad, but there are places where it's not realistic for someone my age and certainly not younger than me. But Canada is a whole different, particularly in areas like Toronto.
Oh, Toronto, Vancouver, it's hopeless for
Yeah.
younger people,
Yeah,
for a lot of younger people.
they're just
And,
far too expensive.
and it's terrible in Australia as well,
Mm.
UK. And yeah, and in America, the average age of the first-time home buyer is now 40 years old,
Mm-hmm.
right?
Yeah,
And
nationwide.
I was listening to a podcast a couple of weeks ago. There's an economist who's doing a study on global fertility rates. And the global fertility rate is actually slightly below replacement now.
Mm-hmm.
And he says that the reason fertility rates have dropped is because house prices around the world have soared. It's that simple
Mm-hmm.
and predictable, by the way. So, anyways, a house is should not be going up in price because it's not a productive asset. So earlier, so our house, we're in a Mississauga, which is a suburb of Toronto. We bought it in 2001. It's gone up 4 times in value. Well, price.
Yeah.
And but why do we deserve that? Earlier, I said in a free market capitalist system, you're only supposed to benefit to the extent that someone else benefits from your actions. You made a bike, I made a suit, we swapped it, we both benefited from our capital creation. So if we sell our home for 4 times what we paid for it, who else out there also benefits 4 times? Nobody.
I was gonna say nobody, only you guys. Now, I guess theoretically, this might have been more so true in the past. If you would say bought your home and then made a lot of improvements to it, and then the price went up because its perceived value went up, that's a different story. But you're talking about specifically a market force that, the way you put it, is artificially created.
Exactly. And you're absolutely right. If you pile a whole bunch of money into it and do renovations, then it's not the same economic good. It's a different economic good, and it might be worth more. Now, a house, our house is not producing 4 times as much stuff as it was back in 2001. It hasn't quadrupled 4 times in size, and we haven't put, to your point, 4 times as much money into it in terms of renovations and stuff. We get 4 times on our home because we benefited from explicit central bank policy to drive asset prices higher. And it's not a conspiracy. They thought that this would be good for everybody. They would say, yes, the rich will benefit the most, but don't worry, the benefits are going to trickle down to everybody else, and we'll all sort of sail off into the sunset singing Kumbaya. Well, no, it didn't happen, and theory would tell you that it wouldn't happen. So all it is, when we make 4 times on our home, is a redistribution of wealth from the next generation, from their bank account into ours. And so the enormous mortgage debt of younger people is helping to fund the retirement of baby boomers. And this is not fair. This is not what the next generation signed up for. The next generation played by all the rules just like we did. Now, don't get me wrong, baby boomers haven't done anything wrong. And most of them have not even thought about it in these terms. They don't think about the fact that they've actually benefited at somebody else's expense, even though they have. And, I've been telling this to people for many years. My generation, as you can imagine, some of them don't like it. They like to think that, they're making money on their home is because they were smart. They timed their house. No, you didn't. You just happen to be older. It's like that line, what's the definition of a financial genius? Well, it's a rising stock market, right? That's it.
Hi, I'm Rose Emanuel,
I'm Justin Cole.
and we are launching our production company,
Give us Mo. We are currently filming from the iconic I Love Lucy soundstage. Check out the pictures.
And maybe we can call this soundstage one of the homes for our productions,
We currently have 3 shows that we want to put through production.
one of which is called It Only Happens with Rose, and it's actually a love letter to I Love Lucy and situational comedy.
Members Only is a workplace comedy similar to The Office or Parks and Recreation that is set in a ritzy, rich country club.
And then our last project is called M, which is a prequel in the James Bond franchise, which follows Judi Dench's character when she was a spy in the 1960s.
productions are unfortunately, but understandably, not cheap.
So your support means the world to us, and you can help us get props, cast, crew, maybe even a soundstage.
Your contributions and your shares help tremendously.
We appreciate everything you guys do for us and have done for us in the past.
Absolutely. We have some cool perks for you to check out as well.
If you believe in us, we can make our dream into a reality.
Be sure to visit giveusmoentertainment.com for more information.
Let's create some momentum. That was so cheesy, I love it. Make sure to follow along on our journey.
Thanks. A bunch.
Cheers. And that's a wrap.
Yeah, so, but most people get it when I tell them. Say, yeah, I never thought about it like that. You're right, it's not fair. They get it. And a lot of them would be okay. They wouldn't be happy, but they would be okay seeing the price of their home go down if it meant that the next generation now could afford to buy a home and start a family and stuff like that. But the trouble is that for younger people who've just bought a home, it'd be particularly painful, right? Who haven't built up equity in their home. But this is what happens when you screw around with the market and you get people making decisions that they might not necessarily have made, or you definitely wouldn't have been paying as much as you would have done for your house. And so this is one of the reasons why there's no easy way out. Now, as I mentioned in my book, for some who suffer due to no fault of their own, government can come in and help out. But remember, government can only come in and help out with capital that they take from the private sector. So it's taxpayers who ultimately are helping those who got into trouble. And so the government doesn't produce any capital of its own. All capital the government spends, it obtains from the private sector through taxation, through borrowing, or through printing money. Now, you asked about wealth disparity. I was just going to show you this quote here, or give you these stats. So this is from, I think it's from the Census Bureau or something like that. So in America, the top 1% own 50% of stocks and mutual funds. The top 10% owns 87% of equities and mutual funds. Bottom 50% owns 1%. So that just gives you an indication about how wide the wealth disparity is. Now, and that has increased a lot since the early 80s. Now, there should be wealth disparity in a free market economy, but it should be based on how much capital you produce. So if you and I both own a bike shop and you decide you're going to make 10 bikes a week, and I decide I'm only going to make one bike a week because I want to go bird watching and stuff like that. Well, guess what? Our wealth disparity is going to be 10 times. You're going to have 10 times the wealth that I had, but your wealth hasn't come at my expense. Right? That's the way it's supposed. So wealth disparity, let's say, should be here, but because central banks interfered with the price discovery mechanism of capital markets and now try to drive asset prices higher, instead of wealth disparity being like this, it's now like this. So this extra part is fake wealth. Well, it's not fake wealth, it's real for them, but it's been taken from the next generation. And that, and in my opinion, is immoral. And so we need to fix that.
Well, I think that's something that I think a lot of more fiscally conservative minded people don't consider. It's the fact that like you said, wealth disparity is a natural and expected thing, but it's to what degree and more so the reason why.
Exactly.
Because it's your example is perfect. If you're creating more capital, then yeah, you would obviously benefit from that in a free market system. But I think the divide that a lot of people don't put together is the fact that wealth disparity is not only is growing much higher than it should because of that manipulation of the market to a select few beneficiaries.
Exactly. And I would say that those top 1%, 0.1%. Like I said earlier, they don't even realize how they are benefiting at other people's expense. They just say, hey, I took a chance. I was an entrepreneur, or I created, Jeff Bezos, let's say, or whatever, and yeah, so maybe you should be a billionaire. Should you be 100 billionaire, whatever he is?
Well, he's kind of a good example to point to for this question is somebody like him who, and I could be totally wrong here. So if I say something incorrect, let me know. But I mean, what he did initially create with Amazon was market changing. So it's like, yeah, he deserves to get a lot of money from that. What I don't know is when that sort of market manipulation started to benefit him to the degree that you're talking about.
The market manipulation?
So what you're talking, what caused the wealth disparity,
Oh, yeah.
the increased
So,
wealth disparity?
yeah, so, stock markets are near record high valuations. By some measures, they are at all-time highs, even higher than 1929, higher than 1999. And that has led to enormous wealth accumulation for so many executives in corporations who have stock options and stuff like this. And so, and that is a direct result of central banks distorting interest rates far below their natural rate, which we can talk about, but also that central banks have conditioned stock markets to expect the central bank to come to their rescue every time they screw it up.
So
So
there's less risk aversion.
exactly. So
I
it's called
gotcha.
they call it the Fed put.
Mm,
And so what it results in enormous amounts of leveraged speculation in the stock markets, which drives all asset prices higher, or most
I,
of them.
I
And
gotcha.
so many people now are benefiting from this. In absolute terms, there's a lot of people, but as a percentage of the population, it's a very small percentage.
I see.
And
Yeah, that makes sense.
right, so and it's not costless because you're distorting the price discovery mechanism of capital markets, which means that capital gets less efficiently allocated or invested, and so there are fewer jobs than there otherwise would have been. There are fewer better paying jobs than there otherwise would have been.
Well,
And
but that would also mean there's less competition because, like, for example, I mean, other online book retailers exist, but none of them is ever realistically going to be on a competitive level with Amazon. They're going to be living at the fringes because Amazon's been able to amass such an amount of capital that it's too big.
yeah, well,
Oh,
yeah, and they benefited over the years because they didn't they I mean they lost money for years.
yeah, yeah,
They were never profitable, or not never, but they weren't for many, many years. But with a low interest rate environment, care of Alan Greenspan and Ben Bernanke, Amazon was able to access, and now maybe they would have been able to obtain that or had access to that capital anyways, I don't know, but they were able to access very cheap capital for a very long time, which definitely would have helped their business model.
yeah, yeah. Because I was just going to say, like, Amazon's at the point now where they could literally lose money for years and still outlast their competitors. Like that's how
Oh
much
yeah. Oh
capital
yeah.
they've been able to, and that's how your Walmarts are often criticized by being able to go into a market and literally lose money until they drive all the
Mhm.
other smaller stores out of business, and then they just raise their prices and like God, that's been their
Yeah,
model.
and I haven't done a study on this, so I can't really say to what degree that has happened. I know a lot of people say it may be. But they Walmart and Amazon um, are pretty amazing businesses. When you think about what Amazon is doing, and now maybe they're screwing others, I don't know. But I mean, my blog is coming up. I'm writing about it. I think it's 200 markets or 200 cities in America. They're going to have 1 hour delivery.
Yeah.
and they're working now on half-hour delivery and drones,
So
and
wild.
it really was life-changing, when you think about it, like how easy it is now. Maybe it's too easy, to
Yeah.
buy stuff and anything you want to find, and I do miss the local bookstores. I mean, one of my favorite things to do, especially used bookstores and stuff like that, But
Oh,
anyways,
I love me a good used bookstore. Fortunately, I have a few around me, so I still have that benefit.
well,
But
good for you.
yeah,
A good online source, sorry, for used books is Thrift Books.
I'm familiar with them. I try to check there before, but to your point, it's if you can't find it anywhere else, you can find it on Amazon.
Yeah.
It's
Yeah.
there. And just to clarify, because I actually used to work for Walmart, I don't have the Walmart hatred that a lot of people do, but I do acknowledge it's. I think that model was more of its approach in like the 1980s. I don't think they have to do that anymore. Like
Hmm.
they're too big. They don't need to come in and drive out the competition. They're fine.
Yeah. Yeah. Yeah.
Switching gears a little bit before we get back into money, I just have to know how in the world did you even find the AI analysis podcast?
The um, it was through uh Pod Pitch.
Oh, okay. Yep, yep.
Yeah, yeah. So yeah, that's how. And yeah, so thanks for responding.
Yeah, no, absolutely. It was weird for me because we're a podcast network, but it's no illusions. We're still fairly small. So when I started getting emails about people inquiring about coming on our shows, I was like, this is so weird. I'm not used to this. I usually have to find people, but there was like it just started and it was so strange to me. But thank you for reaching out.
Yeah, no,
This has been
well,
a
thank
very fun
you.
conversation so far. And you already mentioned your blog and your book. Your blog, Political Economy. I scoped it out. It has some really fascinating topics and information, and I look forward to reading more. And I'm also really
Oh,
excited to
thank you.
read your book, which is available on Amazon, Kindle, and Audible. Um,
Yeah.
but was there a specific thing that happened that inspired you to write it? You kind of touched on it, but was there one thing that made you think I should really start writing about these kinds of things to help people understand, or was it a gradual sort of
Yeah.
journey?
It was more a gradual. I've always liked helping people understand, like thinking about how I can better help someone understand what's happening. And communicating in that way is a lot of work. Putting yourself in somebody else's shoes and trying to determine whether or not how best will they be able to understand what I'm saying, and then coming up with analogies, which are a lot of fun. And you got to be careful. You can get carried away with analogies, but I had a lot of success with analogies over the years with my clients, and the beauty of those is that not only does it bring the concept home for the client, but it does so in a manner in which they can now go and repeat it with their clients. And I used to use this car analogy for investing and holding cash in our mutual funds, why we used to hold cash. And it was like driving across Canada. And so my clients would use that with their own clients. And then I would go out marketing across Canada once a year or so. And then they would come up, Paul, can you give me a refresher on the car analogy? I use it all the time. I want to make sure I got it right. So I've always enjoyed it, but the more I did it, the more I saw the impact it had on people and how it helped them understand. And I can't stand bullshit. I can't stand dishonesty, intellectual dishonesty, and I can't stand seeing people suffering as a consequence of this nonsense. And so there'd be stuff in the newspaper, and I said, "Oh my God." Okay, now I'd write about that, and I do that a lot in my blog. And it's just so disrespectful, I find. And now, for instance, um, we've had this housing affordability crisis in Canada for many years now. And recently, our housing minister blamed our housing affordability crisis on the Iran war.
The housing ability crisis that's been happening for the past couple
15, 20
decades. Yeah.
years. Yeah, on the Iran war.
Hmm.
Well, it was like Biden, and I'm not political. I keep it because the,
Well,
the
no, but
issues transcend both
what
sides, right?
was said, right? Yeah.
Yeah, it transcends politics, the issues, because both sides are guilty because they both misunderstand what's going on. But Biden started calling, and he was told this by his advisors, of course, right? So when inflation was running super hot, he started calling it the Putin price hike. But inflation was 8% before the war even started.
Mm-hmm.
But they say, and both sides are guilty of this, right? But they say this because they know their ardent followers will want to believe that. Oh yeah, the Iran war. That's so. Don't blame our government, or it's the Ukraine war, the Iran war, or whatever, because they want to believe it so badly, and that's why they say these things. I mean, they can't be that stupid that they will believe it, And but yeah, it's frustrating. So when I see that, I call that out really quickly, and it's just about having. My book is not a book about retribution at all. It's a book about, well, first understanding and then hope. And at the end, I have the sort of 10 steps that we would need to take, or some of the steps we need to take in order to fix this thing. Because even the people who got us into this mess, as I said earlier, they're really good intentions, just really gone bad. But their arrogance doesn't allow them to admit that they played any role in this debacle. Because they're trying to protect their legacies, I assume. I don't know. But they're not bad people.
At the start of every year, I find myself wandering again, searching for something new and exciting. I'm constantly questioning life's mysteries. Could I make it in the UFC octagon? What is a landman? When Jeff Probst asks, "Survivors ready?" do they ever want to say no? Where exactly is Bikini Bottom? What is a tush push? Should it be legal? Will Beth and Rip make it last on the new series Dutton Ranch? If not, Rip, call me. How do I get down to South Park to have myself a time? Who handles admissions at Starfleet Academy? Has Dexter ever considered meditation? Who's tougher, Tom Hardy or Piers Brosnan? And why is my answer Helen Mirren? All of these questions, I'll find the answers on Paramount Plus. Stream new series and returning favorites. Movies, live sports, and huge events. I don't need to wonder anymore. What's my password? Oh.
So, what are the changes that need to be done from a monetary policy standpoint?
So, step one is understanding and knowledge. And there's an old saying that the people always get the government that they deserve, but it's only true if the people actually understand what's going on, so you can demand the appropriate policies. But once you have that understanding, and then policymakers are empowered to do the right thing, first thing that needs to happen is the money supply needs to stop increasing at such a rapid rate. I mean, I would love to see a flat money supply, but at the very least, a slowly growing money supply. One of the main issues is that money supply always grows faster than the amount of stuff being produced in the economy, and that's why we have inflation. Policymakers will tell you that we need, 2% inflation for an economy to grow. It's complete and utter nonsense. In America, in the last 30 years of the 1800s, you had money supply growth of just over 4% or something like that. But you had an explosion of productivity. And so the amount of stuff being produced was growing faster than the money. So there was more stuff per money. So the price of the stuff was falling for 30 years. This is called good deflation. That's in a way a free market capitalist system is supposed to work due to investment, innovation, making things more efficiently, cost less. Competition comes and competes away the excess profitability. The beneficiary is always supposed to be the consumer. So even if you have a flat wage, every year you're getting wealthier in real terms because your flat wage buys more and more stuff. That's what's supposed to be happening. And it's not because
Oh, that's the term I was kind of touching on earlier, the real wealth. Okay, so that's what I was
yeah,
talking about. But the point I was making is that maybe they're pointing to that and saying this is an example of real wealth growth because consumer goods are quote unquote getting cheaper. But there are other economic forces in play that are making that not entirely true.
yes. So now there are some goods that go down in price, but the truth is they should be going down even faster.
Hmm.
And well, it's maybe too long for this podcast, but the way they report inflation also is distorted. So they do things some called hedonic adjustment. So if the price of, let's say, a Ford F-150 goes up in price 5%, but the quality of that car or truck went up 10% that year, the government will say you're paying 5% more, but you're getting 10% more truck. So really the price went down 5%. So in the CPI for new cars, they will have new cars going down in price. And I have this in my book from 96 to 2008, I think it was. New car prices were up some 20 odd percent, but the government tells you that they actually went down 9%. Well, you're telling me the new car prices went down 9%, but I can't afford them anymore because the price has gone up so much. What the hell's going on here? So people start to distrust what's coming out of the government's mouth. And there's various reasons why they should not be doing this at all, which. So stop increasing money supply. Second, stop distorting interest rates to low levels to support asset prices. Let asset prices find their own natural intrinsic level determined by market players with people with their own skin in the game. That results in the most efficient allocation of capital. It also results in the fairest distribution of that capital that is created. Third would be to stop bailing out Wall Street. Wall Street has to know, that the next time they blow themselves up and their clients, that the Fed and the Treasury is not going to come to their rescue with taxpayer dollars. And people say, oh, the Fed can just print money. They're not using taxpayer dollars. No, when you print money, it extracts capital from the rest of the money already in existence. Taxpayers are getting screwed either way.
Yeah, I'm
So,
flabbergasted to the degree that we have not learned this lesson yet. That
yeah,
printing money is not a magic band-aid. It comes due really quick nowadays.
it does. No, absolutely.
I pointed this out in the first COVID relief after when Trump was sending out those checks. I still have mine. I kept it
Oh, good.
for posterity. It was through sheer dumb luck that I got a physical check, and I have it, and I'm gonna frame it and keep it as
Good for you.
as like
That's awesome.
yeah. But I said at the time, I said, it's a real shame that we can't opt out, but even if we could, I probably wouldn't because I'm still going to end up paying for it. So I might as well, if I can't opt out of paying for it, I might as well get my, I forget how much it was, $1,200 or something like that. Like I might as well get
Yeah.
my $1,200, but I
Yeah.
said at the time, because we have another podcast where I said at the time, I said, this is not the good thing you think it is. Like it's not even that much relief. Like people who don't have jobs, which they're getting other money, but we're going to pay for this, and it's going to be long and it's going to be painful.
Yeah, no, absolutely. And yeah, so you get it. I mean, a lot of people get it, but a lot don't because they don't want to. They don't want to believe it. They want to believe that printing money is good. They want to believe that driving asset prices higher is good for the economy, particularly those who own the assets. And so then I have a number of other things like central banks I mean, if they stop doing the first two things, like increasing money supply and distorting interest rates, they would stop driving asset prices higher. So stop distorting the price discovery mechanism of capital markets. And then government and finance both need to shrink as a percentage of the economy. So government, I'm not anti-government. Government plays a very important role, defense. So stop other countries from coming and taking our stuff. Police, stop your fellow citizens from coming and taking your stuff. Courts, rule of law, stuff like contract law, stuff like that. And then there might be some various other things, but that's it. And then, well, and in Canada, we have socialized medicine.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, there are pros and cons to it, but I do like it. I mean, there are cons, but yeah, it is good, if people, if you need some emergency surgery or something and you couldn't afford the insurance, it's not going to bankrupt you. And so as I said earlier, government doesn't produce any capital. It obtains capital from the private sector. Government is a facilitator of capital creation through rule of law, contract law, stuff like that. Low taxation, that's another thing. Taxes have to come down because you're paying much more than just your personal income tax, right?
Yeah.
And the finance industry as well, which I was a part of. I played a very important role, but I was the facilitator of capital creation. I wasn't creating any capital of my own. And so finance has become bigger and bigger and bigger as more and more people joined the finance industry and then started making money from each other. And so it's this big burden that the rest of the mainstream economy, or the Main Street economy, is sort of dragging finance and government on its backs. It's getting bigger and bigger and bigger, not producing anything. So both of those have to shrink. And the finance sector would shrink very quickly if the Fed stopped increasing the money supply, stopped distorting interest rates lower, and ensured Wall Street, that they were not going to get bailed out next time. It would reduce in much less speculative or leveraged speculation. And so there would be much fewer opportunity to make money at other people's expense. And so a lot of the brightest and best people leaving university, instead of going to investment banking or hedge funds, they go into like engineering or medicine, stuff that's really going to help the economy, And yeah, there's a couple of other things, but those are
the big ones.
Those are the big ones.
Yeah, it's interesting that you brought up that, because it was actually my friends in Canada that started to turn my opinion on, socialized medicine, which I don't even like to call it socialized medicine, but government funded healthcare. Because I've got a friend in Toronto who he's more conservative than a lot of Americans I know, but he actually said on a podcast once, he's like, look, I'm as conservative as anybody out there, but there's something to be said that if I break my arm or if I get sick, I know that I'm not going to go bankrupt if I get sick. And I'm like, well, it's hard to argue with that logic.
Yeah, no, it might take you a while to get treated.
Sure.
But not always. Not always. And but yeah, and we're sort of fortunate in that, the vast majority of Canadians don't live that far from the American border. And if there is a long wait list for something, you can always jump across the border and pay for it.
Yeah.
If you have that kind of money, but
yeah. Now, are there, not to get off topic, but are there not a lot of private clinics in Canada?
I don't know.
Yeah.
I don't know. So fortunately I haven't had to look into it, but yeah.
I'm getting the idea that there aren't too many, or that they're not enough to cover the gap, so to speak. But
well, yeah, I mean, I should know the answer to this, but I know that there was a lot of pushback. Either there was private clinics or there was talk about it because people were worried that the best doctors would leave the socialized medicine part and go into the private part and, sort of debase the
Yeah.
medical service you would be getting.
Yeah,
I
that would make sense as to why. But anyway, back to finance. So we've touched on what's happening in the economy, but I'm sure what's on a lot of people's minds who are listening to this right now is, well, okay, I'm an everyday Canadian, American, Australian, European, what have you. What can I do to, empower my own financial situation and kind of safeguard my stuff, my nest egg, my life?
Yeah. So step one, educate, right? And pick up my book. And there are others out there too who are talking about this. And don't give up. I know some young people are giving up on the whole YOLO thing and, is it FOMO?
FOMO. Yep.
Yeah. And because they look at how many years it would take to save for a down payment on their home, and then they'll be 60 by the time they can buy their first home. And they say, well, I might as well enjoy my life today because I'm not ever going to be able to afford a home. Well, no, don't give up because I think they will become more affordable. In terms of, and advocate for change. And then in terms of your own, people's own personal investments, just be very careful about the get rich quick schemes. The old saying, if it sounds too good to be true, it probably is. Only invest in things you understand. I've got a diversified portfolio of, like, I just invest in my old mutual funds, which are invested in high quality companies around the world. And I know my team is very careful about the valuation that they pay. You don't want to be paying too much because if you could have a great business, but if you overpay for it, it'll be a lousy investment. Similarly, you could have a great real estate portfolio, but if you overpaid for it, you could still lose a lot of money, despite the fact that nothing happens to the real estate. I've got some gold in my portfolio. It's a central bank lunacy hedge. It's not really an investment because there are various things that central banks, well, the main thing they would probably resort to is called financial repression, where they'll end up printing money to buy government bonds. So they're going to fund the government directly. They'll cap interest rates. It'll result in inflation. So much of your wealth will be inflated away. Your financial wealth will be inflated away. Now they can't print houses. They can't print gold. So, so I've got some real estate. I've got some gold, high quality businesses, got some cash and high interest savings accounts. And then I hardly ever look at it, and then so I'm positioned right now where, if the central banks continue to drive stock markets higher, my portfolio of stocks will grow. If they blow the whole thing up, my gold will probably grow. And vice versa. Right. So if they blow the whole thing up, my stocks will tank, my gold will grow. If they try financial repression and then try to inflate the way out, yes, the value of like stocks and whatnot, they'll go up in nominal terms, but in real terms, they'll lose a lot of money. But my gold will go up significantly in real terms, I think.
Yeah.
So it's like a hedge.
That's why we diversify.
Exactly.
So this is honestly, speaking of gold, this is just a question I've always had. Like, I think I know the answer to this, but you would know better than I. I've always wondered this. So when the U.S. officially got off the gold standard, I understand their logic at the time, but long term, did that hurt more than help, right? It hurt way more than it helped.
Oh, significantly. I mean, there's one website, I think it's called WTF Happened in 1971. And your listener should look it up. And they have all these charts.
Oh, wow. Yeah, I'm going to look it up.
That show stuff. And then when you get to 1971, everything changes.
Mm-hmm.
And one of them was where you had growth in income of sort of, let's say, the bottom 50% or whatever was growing faster than the top 10% until 1971. And then it changed. And so it was all kinds of stuff. Now, what happened was, before from 1944, I think it was, to 1971, we had like what's called a Bretton Woods system. And the monetary was a fixed rate exchange system in the world that was sort of based on gold. But the US government was increasing the money supply faster than they could increase the gold to back up that money supply. And so other countries were getting worried that they were holding lots of US dollars, but they were worried that their US dollars are going to get debased as the US government kept printing more US dollars and exporting them. And so central banks, like particularly in France and I think the UK, started bringing their US dollars back to America and say, we want the gold instead of the US dollars. And so gold was flooding out of America. And on that sort of trajectory, they weren't going to have any gold left before long. And so people would say, well, Nixon had no choice but to close the gold window, that's what they call it, to take the US off and the world off of the gold standard. That happened on August 15th, 1971. But they did have a chance. They did have a choice. The choice was stop increasing the money supply so quickly. Stop spending so much money. And of course, they didn't want to do that. Now you had the Vietnam War, of course, that was sucking up a lot of money. And then you had Lyndon B. Johnson's social programs that cost a lot of money and all that kind of jazz. But yeah, things changed forever after that. And then you had floating exchange rates and then debt to GDP, the start of the slow, steady rise from that time. And now I think you guys are 130% or something like that, debt to GDP or something like that, 120, whatever.
I know that it's flip-flop for sure.
Yeah, and there's just an unwillingness to deal with the issues.
Which
one issue.
we've discussed that at length because it's an unfortunate political reality. Because like you said, it's like I think there are a lot of people that some of them even talk about it. Rand Paul is one, Thomas Massey is another, who constantly talk about we need to get the spending and the national debt under control, and that may include raising the retirement age or somehow, some way cutting Medicaid, Medicare spending, that kind of stuff. And now they usually don't bring up that point, but they acknowledge that something's got to be done about the spending and the debt. But even they seem to lack the political wherewithal to. I think Ron Paul is one of the few that actually did, and he's no longer really involved in politics per se because mainstream, he's unpalatable. Even though a lot of people agree with them, mainstream wise and the powers that be, he's unpalatable. But
yeah,
I get into I don't say argument, not arguments in the sense that there's animosity, but I say all the time, it's like, look, we're past the point of wishful thinking.
yes,
It's gonna be painful somehow. I fully understand. I will not retire at 65, at least not through Social Security. It's not going to happen. And even if I did, there's not going to be enough to live on. So I'm realistically probably not retiring until at least 70, maybe 75, because the money's just not going to be there.
Well, on the current trajectory, social insurance will be insolvent in 2033.
Is that Canada or US? Or
US.
both? US, yeah. I've heard figures similar to that, yeah. And
Yeah.
I believe it.
Yeah. Yeah. So something's going to change.
Yeah.
Right. And this is just math. And then people get all angry at the math, it's stupid. But, neither side, it's still political suicide trying to deal with it, because if one side says they'll fix it by either, delaying the retirement age or increasing the contributions or reducing the benefits, the other side will say, oh, we're going to keep it all in place, so vote for us. And guess what? They get voted in, and then the thing is still insolvent. Doesn't
Yeah.
change the math,
Yeah.
right? So we need some really strong and courageous leadership, like never before. And and sometimes in those situations, that leadership comes to the fore. Because
Yeah.
those people are out there who will do it, but they need the support of the people.
Well, you'll eventually get to it'll probably be too late. Well, it won't be too late because math will change it on its own, like you said. Like you can't
Uh-huh.
it's you can't push it off forever, but there will come a day where it'll fix itself or we'll have to fix it. But either
Exactly.
way, we're at a point where it's going to be painful.
Yeah.
Hey, George
Yeah.
W. tried to fix part of it back in '02, and y'all called him crazy. But I do think
Yeah.
one of my favorite political images ever was, and I don't even remember. I think it was at a Trump rally actually in like 2015 or 2016. It might have been earlier than that, but there was a guy in a crowd holding a sign that says, "Keep your government hands off my Medicare." Not my
Oh
Medicare,
yeah.
my Social Security.
Okay.
Which I'm just
Yeah.
like, okay.
Yeah.
But that brings me up to my next question is how would you assess the current level of financial literacy in the U.S. and Canada, and where are the biggest gaps that you see there?
Yeah. So, there's two aspects, I think, to financial literacy. There's sort of financial planning and stuff like that, you know, people should be. I mean, when I do a lot of these podcasts, people say, why isn't more of this taught in school? Just like investing, how to balance a budget, credit cards, what the real cost is, and all this kind of stuff. So that aspect that needs to improve for sure. And then there's the other aspect, which is how an economy really works. So your personal finances, people need to improve on that. But then the broader economy, which you would think ideally people shouldn't need to understand. Like inherently people do. Inherently people do, but not from a big picture perspective. And because so many myths and garbage has been spewed out by so many academics and policymakers and the something for nothing myth, that it's really hard for people to understand how it really works and then demand the right action. So that's why I wrote my book. Um, and then once they read my book, there's all kinds of other readings that they can do. But as I said earlier, like ideally, you shouldn't have to do that because you would hope that those in charge would do the right thing, would not take actions that effectively buy votes, that put off, doing the 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 necessary but difficult thing. And I think leaders in the past would because they would have more support from both sides. In one of my blogs not long ago, I looked at the sort of approval rating of, President Trump. And so it's a mirror image of what it was for Biden. So like 80 odd percent of Republicans think Trump's doing a great job. Like 5% of Democrats think he's doing a great job. So for Biden, it was over 80% of Democrats thought he was doing a great job, 6% of Republicans. But back in the 50s, 49% of Democrats thought Eisenhower was doing a great job. 49% of Republicans thought Kennedy was doing a great job. So there was a lot less division back then, and leaders could get things done and make maybe difficult decisions because there was a lot less bullshit being tossed about in terms of, have the ability to have your cake and eat it too. There was more realism, people working hard, a fairer distribution of the wealth that was being created. And yeah, so hopefully we can get back to that.
and knock on wood and how. And kind of my last real hard hitting question is, well, actually, I'm going to circumvent that. Um, in regards to personal finance, I've got this idea, which I'm by no means a financial expert. So if I'm wrong on this, please enlighten me because it scares me to think about. But I think it certainly I would think in Canada too, but in the United States in particular, consumer credit card debt it's in the I forget the number now, but it's in the trillions. I think that's the big economic bubble that's going to burst and cause a lot of pain. Please tell me I'm wrong.
Well, yeah, I don't know. Like, and I know the interest rate that people are being charged on credit cards is, I think it's over 20% now.
The average consumer credit card is, I think, at like 24.99%, although it may have gone up to 27. I'm not sure.
Jeez, yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, well, yeah, it's unsecured, right? And you would hope the banks know what they're doing in terms of who they're lending to. But yeah, I mean, I don't know that it would risk, I don't think it would risk bank balance sheets in terms of insolvency and stuff like that. I don't know if it's that big, but it would be painful for sure. But it's painful on a daily basis for those who hold that credit card debt when you're paying 24% annual interest rate on that debt. That's terrible. You know,
Yeah, I shouldn't have said bubble. I think more realistically, that's the largest sort of financial. That's going to be the more painful financial pressure that's really
Mhm.
coming on a consumer level. But it will affect the wider economy because, to your point, if you've got too much debt and it's painful, you're less likely to. You'll spend money on some consumer goods because you already have with the credit card. But somebody with $50,000 in credit card debt is going to have a really, really hard time buying a home or buying a car or being able to afford to have a family. At a certain point, it's going to become painful to buy groceries without debt if the cycle doesn't stop. And when does it end? It ends with individual insolvency or bankruptcy.
Yeah, no, it's good for the bank, but it's
Yeah, that's what a lot of people don't understand too. Is like obviously the bank doesn't want you to default, but in the scheme of things, an individual consumer debt default doesn't affect them to the point where they'd stop doing it.
no, they're pretty good at math. They have a pretty good idea how many are going to default and how much interest they need to earn and all this kind of stuff. But it's and I blame policymakers for this as well. No individual person, but just generally against this, the widespread garbage that's thrown out there that, you know, they've encouraged debt-fueled consumption because they think consumption is the fount of all economic prosperity because consumer spending is two-thirds of GDP. No, what enables the spending is the fount of economic prosperity, which is saving and investment. So if you have to borrow, eventually you get to a point where you can't borrow anymore, to your point. Can't spend anymore. But if your spending is funded by your fact that every week you're making 10 bikes and you're selling them, that your spending is sustainable because it's based on your capital creation, not the fact that you're borrowing money every week to go spend. And then they make it okay, like it's socially acceptable now to like rack up debt on your credit card.
It's
And
socially encouraged because now you get points.
yeah, well, yeah, no, exactly. So, I mean, there's nothing wrong with credit cards if used responsibly, right?
Right, but the thing of it is if everybody used credit cards responsibly, the banks wouldn't make any money.
Yeah, no, true.
Well, they'd make money because they make what it would do is it would pass it because I've been in small businesses basically my entire adult life, and that it would just end up costing the businesses more money, which then they would eventually just adopt a cash based business to avoid paying the exorbitant finance fees. But yeah,
Yeah, yeah,
yeah,
yeah,
no, the banks will make their money for sure, but
yeah.
they're very much benefiting on the financial illiteracy of the average consumer that's out there, or not even illiteracy, just the belief in things that just aren't true, i.e., like I've heard so many people saying, like, oh, it's better to use somebody else's money. Well, yeah, until you have to pay it back with
Yeah,
24%
exactly.
interest. Yeah, it's
Exactly.
awesome to use someone else's money until you have to pay the bill. And
Exactly.
if they're making 0% interest, they have no reason to lend you that money unless they're just a real friendly neighborhood bank.
Yeah. Yeah. No, exactly.
I can't see them doing. But yeah, not all, to your point, not all banks are bad. My credit union just cut my car interest loan in half for me. So
That's okay.
I love my bank.
Yeah. There you
Really,
go.
I really like but credit, I'm a credit union guy. That's how and why they were able to do that.
Okay.
Um, but more kind of on a grander scale, I've heard, and I'll be the first to admit, I don't fully understand it, but there are a lot of people saying that in particular, the U.S. national debt is not as big of a deal as people make it out to be, because what the government is going to do is they're going to slowly, intentionally spike inflation so that the real cost of what they're paying back on that debt is less than what they borrowed, or at least it's a lesser burden.
Yeah.
That smells like, it doesn't smell like it's necessarily not true, but that's going to really hurt the average consumer by doing that.
Oh, huge. That's the financial repression that I was talking about earlier. So, yeah, you decide you're going to lend $50,000 to the government. So you've got 50,000 in treasuries that you've socked away for your retirement. Now, the government's not producing anything to pay you back that 50,000. The only way they can pay you back is by taxing the next generation. So let's say it's a 30-year bond. So they're going to tax the next generation 30 years, or they're going to borrow from someone else in 30 years to pay you back, or they're going to print money. And every time they print money, they extract capital from the rest of the money already in existence. So they debase the currency. So yes, you get your $50,000 back. So the government's able to pay you back because they printed money. But your $50,000 now is going to buy a fraction of what it would have done when you originally lent it to the government. So they extract value from you. I'll give you a quick example. So let's say you make 10 bikes, you sell them for $1,000 each. So you got $10,000. You put it in your bank account. That $10,000 effectively is storing up temporarily the 10 bikes that you produced. The fact that you can go and buy something with your $10,000, what gave you the wherewithal to do that was the fact that you created 10 bikes of capital. But you didn't go exchange directly with your bikes. You sold them for money, stored up in the money. It's in your bank account. Now, before you get a chance to go spend that money, the Federal Reserve doubles the money supply. Now, when they increase the money supply, they don't increase capital. They don't create capital to obtain that money. They just create it out of thin air. But that money with no capital stored up in it, it obtains capital from the rest of the money already in the system as soon as it comes into the economy. So when the newly printed money enters the economy, it takes 5 of the bikes from your $10,000 and puts it into the newly printed money. So now your bank statement says, oh, look, I still got $10,000 and, good for me. But it's only storing 5 bikes instead of 10. And so now your $10,000 will only buy half as much as it would have done before the central bank doubled the money supply. And so that's what the central bank, that's what the government will do over the years. All this debt, 30 trillion or whatever, they're going to be able to pay it back. Of course they can, because they can just print money. But it's going to be worth way less. They're extracting people's savings from them. Not in dollar terms, but in terms of what those dollars will buy.
Mm-hmm.
It's just an invisible tax, or a hidden tax, I should say.
Yeah, well, it was funny. It's kind of a morbid joke, but it's also true. I pointed out in the height of COVID, when the inflation was at, like, I think real inflation on paper was 9%, but not real inflation. I'm sorry. Inflation on paper was at about 9%, but real consumer inflation was probably around 20 or 25. I pointed out, started as a joke, and then I realized how right I was. I was like, yeah, inflation's at 25% because Dollar Tree became $1.25 tree overnight.
There you go.
And it's
Exactly.
like, oh, wait, no, that is a 25% increase. Oh, no.
Yeah, yeah, yeah. No, no, exactly. You can see it all around you,
Hmm.
right? And you definitely feel it in your wallet, you know.
For sure, even my new wallet costs more than it should. Um, but so I guess just to kind of give a hopeful message at the end of this, is there a light at the end of the tunnel, or is I mean I'm realistic enough that there's gonna be some pain, but there is a light at the end of the tunnel as you see it.
Yeah, there is. You know, some people say, well, yeah, it's just a train coming towards you, you know, but no, there is light at the tunnel and at the end of the tunnel. It's hard to see right now, and it's hard to see in terms of policymakers changing their ways. I mean, I can see it because more and more people are talking about this. And so the word is starting to spread. So it won't come from our policymakers, won't come from the top down. I believe it'll be like a grassroots movement that go bottom up. And so more and more people are discussing this. People are becoming more and more empowered. And then that will filter up to our leaders. And so that's the light that I'm seeing. But it's definitely not coming from their actions, those in charge. But it will.
Yeah. Well, some might say that coming from the bottom up is the only way you're going to actually change something institutionally.
Yeah.
Because
Yeah.
if one policymaker enacts it as soon as they leave office, the powers that be will put somebody in there, or they'll just eliminate them entirely for all the more tinfoil hat people out
Yeah.
there. Um,
No, you're right. The people need to demand it. Like it's got to be the popular thing to do, otherwise it won't persist.
yeah, it has to be the expectation of the populace, so to speak.
Hmm. Yeah. Yeah.
Well, Paul, I really appreciate you coming on. It was an illuminating conversation. I'm glad it didn't end too sad because there's a lot of doom and gloom
Yeah.
out there when it comes to finances. But if people want to hear more, how can they find you?
Yeah. Yeah. Thanks, Jake. It's been a lot of fun. So I have a website called Paddington Capital MGMT.com. And they can find also you can access it by Political Economy, which is my blog. So it's my name, PAUL, economy.com. And so on there, it's a free blog. You just put your email in, you'll get a notification every Monday when I send it out. No catch, it's free. And I've got interviews there and stuff. And and then my book, Capital Offence: Why Some Benefit at Your Expense. It's available on Amazon. You mentioned it's Audible as well for those who prefer to listen. I think Thrift Books has it, Barnes and Noble. And yeah, so and I've got my social media stuff is on my website as well. So LinkedIn and X and Instagram. So
Excellent. And I'll put links to everything to that in the description of this video, which will be coming out probably next week because yeah, we're already at March 21st. So yeah,
okay,
it should be
awesome.
out the following week. But if you're watching it now, you know when it came out because you're watching it right now.
Yeah.
All right, Paul. Like I said, thank you again. I look forward to reading your book. I'm actually
Yes,
glad to
thank
hear
you.
it might be at my Barnes and Noble because I will go see because I was gonna have to order it on Amazon, but I might be able to go get it later on today.
Well, it probably is not on their shelf. You might be able to order online and then
Gotcha.
it deliver to the store. I did find one store in Boca Raton
Hey,
because we have a place down in Florida that had it on the shelf, but it's the only store I've been able to find that's got it on the shelf. So maybe online.
it's worth a check. Although I got to be careful when I go into bookstores because it becomes a problem.
Yeah, I know what you mean.
We were my wife and I were in Five Below the other. I don't know if they have Five Below up there, but it's basically like it's a store where everything's allegedly $5 or less. It's not true anymore, but it used to be. We were in
Yeah.
there getting a case for my new phone, and I just happened to look over at this table, and they've got all these literary classics in like
Wow.
gold page
Oh,
books for $5. I found Frankenstein, I found the Odyssey, the Iliad, and I'm just
nice.
like,
Yeah.
and I'm like, I got no, we're not here for this. But I'm
It's
going
so
back.
great. It's so great to have those on your bookshelf.
I love them. I love them so much,
Yeah.
as you can see.
Yeah. 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 Good for you.
Yeah, we got to double this thing though. We're almost out of room. We got to get another one.
Yeah. Nice. Nice.
All right, Paul. Well,
Yeah.
thank you
All
again.
right, Jake. Yeah.
Have a
Thank you.
fantastic day.
Yeah. You too. All the best.
Bye.